Sergio Perez is out of Red Bull, and although it's being dressed up as an amicable split to keep a sense of respect between the two sides, in reality Checo has been dropped by Red Bull despite having signed a contract extension earlier in the season. We all knew that this was coming sooner or later because even by the summer break, Horner, Marko and Red Bull were already having crisis meetings to discuss his future, and I have watched F1 for long enough to know that once those sorts of conversations are publicly happening at management level, the driver's days are numbered. The bottom line is that Checo this season has cost the team at least second place in the Constructors, which financially is a loss of well over $10 million. Now, it's important to mention that by dropping Perez, the team will also most likely lose out on a sizable amount of sponsorship money, which also came with Checo, which is estimated to be over $30 million. The contract that was given to Checo was supposed to last until the end of 2026, but we know now that it was basically just a facade. Even Horner admitted during the season that it was designed to give Checo more confidence because it would stop the constant speculation about his future, which only adds more pressure. That contract, even at the time, made absolutely no sense, but in retrospect we have learned that its real purpose was to give Checo an ultimatum in the sense that yes, he got the extension that he wanted, but with it also came more aggressive performance-related exit clauses that Red Bull could trigger, which is exactly what they have done after negotiating his buyout. When I look back at Checo's time with Red Bull, although you might find it strange, I actually see it as a massive success for him overall. When he joined Sauber in 2011 as a pay driver, let's not forget, no one at the time would have thought that he would go on to achieve as much as he has. He was never going to become a world champion, but racing for over a decade, winning 6 Grand Prix, scoring 39 podiums, earning tens of millions of dollars, and going on to drive for a world championship winning team, that is a really good F1 career for a midfield driver, and it's a better career than most drivers have had. That is not to say that Checo's career is even over, because with a team like Cadillac joining in 2026, I think with his experience, pedigree and commercial power in Latin and North America, he might be the perfect fit. When you actually look at his gap to Max, it has been pretty consistent throughout their time as teammates, and that was always the problem. Everyone could see that his issues were being masked by how dominant that Red Bull was during parts of 2022 and throughout 2023. Last season, with 3 races to go, Lewis Hamilton was only 20 points behind Checo in the fight for second in the driver's title with a car that didn't win a race all season. And that in itself at the time rang massive alarm bells about how badly he was underperforming. We always knew that the moment the rest of the field would catch up to Red Bull, that Checo would be exposed because he wouldn't have the car advantage to mask his deficit, and that is exactly what has played out in 2024 with massive consequences. During the first few races where the Red Bull was untouchable, it was business as usual with him scoring 4 podiums in the first 5 races, 3 of them being 1-2 finishes. However, the moment McLaren, Ferrari and Mercedes started to win races, Perez has basically been relegated into the midfield and scored just 49 points since Miami. And now I think it's really easy to just solely blame Checo for everything because he is the driver responsible for his own performances and call it a day. But to be honest, I actually don't. To me, the mess that Red Bull finds itself in is almost entirely of their own doing. We can't forget that Checo was only brought in as a stopgap after the years of chaos of trying to replace Ricciardo with Gasly and then Albon. He was never meant to be a long-term option, just an experienced, safe pair of hands that could bring stability into the team for a couple of years before they inserted their next Red Bull Jr. The problem with Checo's situation is twofold. On one side, Red Bull totally mismanaged their second team, which is supposed to be a funnel for young drivers, and also abandoned their harsh but fair young driver philosophy that has brought them so much success in the past. On the other side, Horner and Marko as the bosses of Red Bull also have to take a huge amount of responsibility for keeping Checo as long as they did. Because when you are the boss and your employee is underperforming, it's your responsibility to replace him. By purposefully choosing to keep Checo as long as they did, when they knew that he wasn't going to improve, they basically set him up for failure through their incompetence, and in my mind, they are just as much to blame for the team underperforming as he is, because they are the ones who chose to keep him there. It's amazing to me that 10 or so years ago, even though people were critical of the Red Bull conveyor belt of young drivers and how high their turnaround was, the fact is it produced winning drivers. They had Vettel, Ricciardo, Verstappen, Gasly, and even if not all of these drivers went on to become champions for Red Bull, they all went on to have some level of success. In recent years, they've all but abandoned giving young drivers opportunities that they were famous for doing, and instead they started either taking punts on drivers outside of their program, like with Nick de Vries, or going back to older drivers that just didn't fit the Red Bull model, like Ricciardo. The only driver who I think would have been an understandable exception to this rule is Carlos Sainz. This is another problem that is currently systemic at Red Bull, and that's how political this team has become. As we saw at the start of the year between Horner, Max, Jos, Marco, the tyre owners, and the Austrian side as well, there are so many factions and so much politics that gets in the way of basic decisions. Sainz to Red Bull should have been almost an automatic decision, because when you have a driver as good as Carlos Sainz on the market that you compare with Verstappen to make arguably the strongest lineup on the grid, why would you not go and do that? Had they given Sainz a 2 or 3 year deal like he wanted, it would have given the team some insurance for the future, as although Carlos is obviously not as good as Max, he is still more than good enough to be the team leader and win races and maybe even championships in his absence. In the end, it came down to intervention from the Verstappen camp, who didn't want Sainz Jr. and Sr. in the team, and also unresolved resentment from Marco from the way in which Sainz left Red Bull for McLaren in the first place. We know now that Liam Lawson will be the one to replace Perez, and it feels like Red Bull are finally doing a course correction after years of being in the wilderness. Now, for those of you who have watched my videos regularly, you will know that I'm a big fan of Yuki Tsunoda, and you will also know that at no point have I ever said that I think he will get a seat at Red Bull. Yuki has done everything he needs to. He beat de Vries when Marco brought him in as the next big thing, he beat Ricciardo when Horner brought him back as the prodigal Red Bull son, and he also beat Lawson as he should have done. The fact is, for various performance, mentality and political reasons relating to Honda, Horner and Marco made their mind up about Yuki a long time ago, and there is nothing he can do to change that. And now I'm definitely going to be doing a dedicated video on Yuki's 2025 situation because, well, long story short, he doesn't have a future with Red Bull, and so his primary goal next season is going to be to find a seat for 2026. With Liam going to Red Bull, it's Isaac Hadjar, who came runner-up in Formula 2, who will be stepping up into Formula 1 with RB, and further down the ladder it will be Arvid Lindblad, who I think could be a very special talent, who will also be making the jump up from Formula 3 into Formula 2, and with Yuki almost certainly leaving for 26, a potential F1 promotion could be on the cards for him in 12 months' time. All of these moves I think are a good thing because it's bringing Red Bull back to what they do best, which is give loads of young drivers a chance in Formula 1, and if they then swim, then great, and if they don't, then, well, you move on to the next young driver. That is not to say that there might not be bumps along the road. Lawson might end up being just as bad as Perez, Hadjar might come in and be totally crash prone, and even Arvid Lindblad might end up disappointing in Formula 2. The point is that when you look at the success that other teams have had this season when they have given young drivers a chance, Red Bull need to get back and stick to that philosophy, and eventually they will find their next championship caliber talent that will replace Max Verstappen. Having said all of that, when it comes to the question of are Red Bull preparing these young drivers in the best way possible to succeed, that is a whole other conversation. Liam Lawson, after making just 11 Grand Prix starts in Formula 1, will join Red Bull as the least experienced Formula 1 driver they have ever had. And now, in terms of overall racing experience, Liam has won races in almost every single championship that he's ever competed in, and although he hasn't won that many championships, he has always competed for the title, finishing second in Super Formula, second in DTM the season that Albon was racing there as well, and also recently finished third in Formula 2. Given how turbulent the performance levels of that second Red Bull has been in the hands of Checo, and given that we're expecting for next year's grid to be one of the most competitive we have ever seen, trying to come up with realistic expectations for where Liam should be compared to Max is almost impossible. Max Verstappen can extract performance and execute weekends in that Red Bull that I don't think any other driver would be able to do. If Lawson doesn't deliver early, then it's obviously going to pile on heaps of pressure and criticism, but Red Bull are just going to have to deal with it. The problem that Red Bull have caused themselves is that had they promoted Yuki for 25 and then wanted to drop him, they could have just promoted a now experienced Lawson, who in 25 would have had a whole season at RB under his belt. And now, however, if Lawson struggles next year, Red Bull are basically out of options. 24 was a contract year where we had the likes of Hamilton, Sainz, Alonso, as well as most of the top midfield drivers all out of contract. Most of those drivers now are locked into 2 or 3 year contracts, and so if Lawson doesn't work out, Red Bull are going to struggle to find a replacement for him either from their own pool or outside of it. It really is a case of they made their bed and now they have to lie in it. When I think about the ground effect era, it's staggering how a team as good as Red Bull, with best in class when it comes to driver, when it comes to the operational side, when it comes to car development, can be absolutely incompetent when it comes to driver management. And now that they don't have a dominant car, and with the uncertainty around how long Max will stay at the team, whilst Checo is by no means blameless, since Dietrich Mateschitz' death, it's Horner and Marko who are the ultimate architects of the team's downfall. They are the ones who failed to create a Verstappen succession plan. They are the ones who drove away Adrian Newey, and they are the ones who now have to bear the responsibility and consequences. Well, there you have it. If you did enjoy this video and want to support the channel, then don't forget to subscribe, that would be massively appreciated, and I'll see you in the next one.